Welcome to this compilation episode exploring the idea of stretching our comfort zones, which can come up in various ways along our unschooling journey. Often, we first encounter it when we're actively deschooling and questioning so much of the conventional wisdom around learning and parenting that we've absorbed growing up. We can also find ourselves playing at the edges of our comfort zones if our child becomes interested in something that we're not fond of, or maybe we're unfamiliar with. Or maybe our child's learning journey wanders further off the beaten path than we were first expecting. So in this episode, I've brought together snippets from 8 different podcast conversations that I hope you might find helpful and inspiring the next time you bump up against the edges of your comfort zones. To get us started, in episode 16, Jenny Cyphers and I talked about stretching our comfort zones during the teen years. I know in my experience, and many others, and even, you just don't use the word teen rebellion in your conversations, because when unschooling parents are helping our teens meet their goals, instead of trying to control them to meet our goals for them, the conflict and the rebellion piece fades away. And what you're left with is experiences and learning and processing. It's not, as you're saying, it's not that things are easy breezy, because it's really life. It's their life, and our comfort zones may well need stretching, but it's their life to live, and we want to be around to help them do that. Yeah,
absolutely. I think so many kids have their lives micromanaged, and I think any person, even myself, I don't like to be micromanaged, even as an adult. Just the thought of it.
I know.
Jeez. Nobody likes that. Nobody likes being micromanaged. And for whatever reasons, parents want to micromanage their kids, and kids react to it just in the same way that adults react to that. They don't like it. Nobody likes it. And kids in school get it double, because they get micromanaged at school and then they get micromanaged at home. And if you're lucky, you have parents that don't micromanage. And if you're in school, you still have to deal with micromanagement of school. So when you take the school component out, you're not micromanaging that element of their life. You're not micromanaging what they're learning or how they're learning it, and you facilitate learning for sure. We did that lots. I mean, there was a point, and we're talking about pushing comfort. There was a time where my oldest, when she was a little bit younger, maybe around 13, she was obsessed with blood, and it freaked me out. She would make fake blood or buy fake blood and do like bloody bath scenes and photograph them. And I'm thinking, is there something wrong with my child? I mean, this doesn't seem normal to me. And I just had to breathe and push through it. And I just watched very carefully instead of reacting, because I know a lot of people would have reacted. Oh my God, my child, there's something wrong with them. They're obsessed with blood. But I thought those thoughts initially, and then I just really paid attention and watched and looked, and she was making art. That's what it was. And it was very much anime inspired. Mm-hmm. Weird, but true. It was anime inspired, and she was definitely inspired by horror movies, something that I also had to press through my own comfort zone. And she wanted to do more and more of that, so I looked around and we got involved in doing haunted houses. And that was a huge eye-opener for me, because I was suddenly surrounded by all these people who talk about horror movies as beautiful. Oh, did you see the way that blood spurted? Oh, it was beautiful. And I'm like, I've entered the Twilight Zone, literally. But it was kind of a big deal, because suddenly I realized oh, what my daughter is going through, other people are doing this and love it, and so I found ways to support the things that she really enjoyed doing, and I kind of went off on a tailspin there, but
Oh, that's really cool. You know what? I'll pipe in because Lissy too. There was a time when there was a lot of blood and stuff in her photographs and pictures. And I remember, looking up recipes to make fake blood and going to stock up at Halloween time because you could go and get all those kinds of stock for her to keep for her set building and everything. I know. And at first it's kind of a shock. Are they... and you worry at first, are they upset? Are they stressed? Why are they, focusing on this? But then, as you said, you think through it and you see that this is, an art form to them. And, you look closely and no, they're not, depressed. They're not angry. They're still themselves. And look, this can really be just something fascinating. So interesting.
Right. And, a lot of my daughter's friends' parents freaked out about it and weren't into it. They tried to micromanage and control all of that too. Oh, this weird thing that my kid is into. No, I'm not going to support that. That's weird. No, do what you're supposed to do, kid. I mean, we saw that a lot all around us. And even some of the even some of the unschooling parents we knew didn't, we didn't know a whole lot with kids. My kids got along with, but there were a couple, and, it really makes a difference. And I've seen the differences in that. It really makes a difference when you go out of your way to not only not control and micromanage what your kid does, but to go way beyond that and push past your own discomfort and really look at things from your child's perspective and then explore those things with them. It makes this mountain of difference.
Oh my gosh, yes. That's huge. That's such a huge piece of it all, right? Because they are their own person.
You're right. And you have to have both because we've met some people who kind of dabbled in unschooling, who tried to support all the interests, but then micromanaged. And that didn't go over so well. It didn't. I've seen that, and it doesn't go over so well. And then I've seen people who don't micromanage at all, but aren't really supportive of what their kids are into. And that doesn't go over so well either. Neither. I mean, you really have to have both of those in play. Yep. You really have to not be micromanaging, not be controlling, and really, really delve into the things that they're into and push past your own comforts to do it, because that's what I had to do, and it worked out really well, and I can see the benefits of it. I mean, it starts when your kid wants to go for a walk by themselves for the first time. I mean, that's scary. Yeah. It is, depending on where you live. I mean, I live in a suburban area surround, on the outsides of a fairly big city, and there's mass transit and, walking to the store by yourself I remember that feeling the first time she did it, and she didn't have a cell phone on her, and I was scared. I was like, oh my gosh, somebody's going to kidnap her. But no, of course not. I had to push all those fears aside because that's not really what happens in life. Aside from the weird freak accidents, that's just not reality.
I know, and every single time I pushed my comfort zone, I was always better off for it in the end. I always learned so much, and it was such a great experience so now I can draw on that. Like every time I know I'm the one who needs to grow, right? I loved hearing how Jenny stretched her comfort zones around her daughter's interest in all things horror, and her observation that supporting our kids isn't just about not micromanaging how they engage with their interest, but also doing the work to move through our discomfort so that we can actively support them and bring new ideas to the table. Next, we hear from Robert Gottlieb from episode 93, and we dive into comfort zones, beliefs, and boundaries. Speaking of our kids, have there been times when your kids' interests or choices have challenged your thinking or stretched your comfort zones? And if so, how did you work through those moments?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, it's not like, so, everything I've talked to up to this point, I might have painted this perfect rosy picture of perfect balance in a household. And, we have this tidy house that, it's not anything like that at all. And but it's not total chaos either. So, I don't want to paint a horrible picture, but the reality is somewhere in between. There's life is life, right? It's messy at times, and you have to kind of roll with it. And we as parents, how we handle these things, these going outside of our comfort zone, is something our kids are observing us do. So they're learning from us as we're doing this. So it's important that we do handle it well, or at least clean up after ourselves if we don't. Which is another point overall, being able to say, I'm sorry. And, I screwed up. I didn't want to behave that way towards you or whatever. But definitely, the triad of sex, drugs, and religion, right? So, the big key there for us was being able to have honest conversations with them, and for them to, understand that we're not just making this stuff up, that we truly believe what we're saying. And, things like sex, that wasn't actually that hard for us. We've always been about, this is, naming the body parts correctly and not giving them names and all that. But, the hard balance is, okay, yes, there's certain philosophies that we believe in that may not jive with the law, right? So we have to be careful about that and not break the law. So how do we do that? Well, it's a tough balance, and we discuss that with them. Religion, we're Jewish, but our kids decided, religion doesn't matter that much to us, and that actually wasn't a big deal for us. For someone else, it could be a big deal, though. You could be devout Christian, devout Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever, and you've got a kid that could care less and wants nothing to do with it. And the key there is, if you ever want a kid to join whatever you're doing, the best way to do that is to leave them alone, because if you try to make them do it, they're not going to want to, and later on they're going to rebel. That doesn't mean that they're going to join anyway. It could be that that's just their opinion, that's who they are, and that it's all about accepting them where they are. So, I mentioned religion. It's really not outside my comfort zone at all. I had no problem with them saying, look, I'm not really into this. I don't believe in God, or I do, or and that changes over time too. Maybe they do one time, they later on, well, I'm agnostic, or I do believe in God, or none of that really matters. It's their personal choice. So the big thing is, being able to, the big thing is having the relationship that we do allows for us to have these conversations when they hit boundaries for us. And, we can flat out say no, it's just as I would with my wife, can I come sit on your lap? No, I need my space right now. That's a reasonable thing to say. And so the same with our kids, it's not about letting them cross all of your boundaries and, go all over your comfort zones and you not saying anything. You talk about it, and there's compromise maybe, or maybe there's not. Maybe there's just something you can't compromise on, and that's that. And they understand that. And because you have the good relationship with them, because they trust you, that's not such a big deal. They can handle those no's. The key is saying yes as often as you can, so that when you do say no, number one, it means something, and number two, it's accepted pretty easily, actually.
Yeah, because from that relationship, they, when you've got that trust, you can have that conversation. You can explain your thinking, right? And it's a conversation that you're having. It's not an edict that you're passing down, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, I love that point that it all comes back to the relationship. And that is one of the big things, I think, because no matter what, we can have strong beliefs in certain things. I mean, like we're talking about religion and sex, and for some people, like it's food, maybe you're a staunch vegetarian for your lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
The challenge comes when you put that expectation on your child to follow, right? And what gets damaged is the relationship. So again, going back to that relationship to see, to understand that depending on your response, that's what's at stake. Right.
Exactly.
And it may be worth it to you. Like you said, you may have a no, or, this is my line, and this is where I feel I need to draw my line for my children. If that's something that you need to do, you need to understand that the effect of that is going to be what that effect is going to be on your relationship. So, trust is going to be diminished certainly for a while. If that's something that they still feel they need to explore, then they're going to need to do that behind your back, basically, because they don't want to get in trouble, and they know that you're not going to be happy about it. So they're going to explore it on their own. So, that still may be something that's acceptable to you. And it's just knowing what your choice. You really can't have an expectation that you can literally control another person, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Certainly not as they get older, right?
Oh, definitely not. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's fascinating. And I love that piece because it's the dance of our relationships. It's like, how one thing that really helped me when I was stretching comfort zones was talking to them, right? Because so often our comfort zones are on rather conventional lines, just because we can't visit everything when we first come to unschooling, right? Our comfort zones and our paradigms and the way we see things, they just are. And it's when they come up that we're like, oh, hold it, I'm getting uncomfortable here. And yeah, you're right. You don't want to ignore that uncomfortableness because you're losing depth in the relationship and damaging the relationship then as well, right? I think for me, the really important thing, though, was to do a lot of that work at first internally to really understand myself and why that line was there, and to understand where they were coming from. Because so often my stereotype and where they were coming up against that, they were coming from such a different perspective. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, I can see why you want to do that. And then things were great. And I didn't even really, they think so much. They've half the time addressed my concerns already that I don't even really have to say much, right?
Yeah, and the thing with when you're looking at your own boundaries and you're respecting yourself, that's something that you're teaching the kids at the same time. They're watching you do that. You're their model for what life is like as an adult. So if you're saying, oh, this doesn't work for me, that allows them to say the same thing as an adult.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Yeah, because they're seeing you think it through. They're seeing you process it. They're seeing you sharing your insight, your understanding, etc., and working through it with them. And absolutely, those are skills that every time you do that with them, they're gaining experience with doing it, right? And that's a skill that they take with them forever. That's why focusing on the relationship just brings it's lifelong skills, right? Not facts that they're learning.
Right. You're not filling their heads with information. You're showing them life as it unfolds live.
Exactly. Oh, I know. It's beautiful. Okay. Oh, and I'm just going to go back and say it again. Life is messy. I love that.
Yeah.
Yes, life is messy. Taking the time to understand ourselves, stretch our comfort zones, explore our boundaries, have conversations with our children, and help them as they're doing the same. It's life. Next, in episode 97, I spoke with Erica Davis Petrie about diversity and asked if she could share some ways we can be more welcoming to families from the wide variety of backgrounds that exist in the unschooling community. Here's her reply.
Number one, if you don't live in a diverse community, if you don't have diverse, rich experiences, please don't make your only diverse experience charitable. So don't go to the food kitchen on Thanksgiving. Don't help out at the homeless shelter. Don't deal with diversity in a charitable way. We are helping. The good helper syndrome is really difficult to get beyond once you reach a level of maturity. And that less than attitude from well-meaning people is, in my opinion, just as bad as the person that says, "You're brown, I don't want you around. You're trouble because of your culture." I really would hope that, especially in the unschooling community, diversity is achieved by moving out of your comfort zone, your area, your neighborhood, and moving into someone else's culture, comfort zone, neighborhood, for all kinds of art classes, library things, swimming things, opportunities for, all kinds of cultural and community experiences. You can just leave your neighborhood and experience a writing class on the other side of town, a book club on the other side of town. If your actual town is not very diverse, there are plenty of ways to be welcoming, and that's by extending yourself and your discomfort level into another community and meeting friends that way. I think it's one of the best ways we as unschoolers have to broadening our palette and making sure that we have diverse experiences.
Yeah, I loved that point because, first of all, the impression that you're leaving with your children, like without saying anything, if your only focus is on charity, I thought that was such a great point. I'd never thought of it that way. And, that was very cool when you shared that. And the ideas to extend your community, right? Go different places. You don't have to stay. I think, and that reminds me of when, people talk about trying an activity, right? Whether it's karate or Girl Guides or whatever, they always pick the closest one just for convenience, right? But think bigger. Like I know, with my kids, I've driven distances for, many reasons, Girl Guides an hour away because that group was a better fit. And, this is yet another reason why we don't need to keep our mindset so close geographically, right? There's so many great reasons to open ourselves up to all the possibilities that, maybe an hour or two, like we've gone 2 hours away to things on a regular basis. It's a great reason for that.
Exactly. You have to look at it as a friendship. And if you look at it as a friendship and rather than an obligation, it's pretty easy to widen your palette. If you look at it as an obligation, I have an obligation to have my children have diverse experiences.
Yeah.
You're going to resent it after a while. But if you look at it as a friendship, as giving your children more, as equipping them with more rather than less, the richness of the experience will win out. But we are creatures of convenience. And we do like being around each other. When I say that, we like being around people that we know, people that make us feel comfortable, people that we can be unconscious around. It's a powerful myth that it's easy to be in a diverse community. It is not. It's constantly questioning what you know to be true. So it's work. It's work to be in a diverse community. It's easier to be in a homogeneous community where you think everyone feels the way you do. You have social norms that you conform to. That's easier. It is easier. It's more difficult to think of someone that you have seemingly nothing in common with, how are they going to react to this? How are they going to feel about that? It takes a lot of emotional work to put yourself out there. It's not easier. It gets easier, but it's not easy. We self-segregate because it's easy for economic reasons, for racial and cultural reasons, for gender reasons. We self-segregate quite nicely as humans, and not doing that is difficult at first. It gets easier, but it butts up against what we feel is normal, quote unquote. Just like unschooling, it gets easier. I mean, the first few years I was unschooling, I didn't know what it was called, and the need to have that workbook, on the counter, and have it available on the bookshelf, have it available in the book bin, have it available in the trunk, have it available in the box, in the garage. You see how it's moving? You see how it's moving? But it's still available, because if that's the way I want availability, that's to me, that's the representative of how we handle anything that's against our norm. We leave the option for normalcy available. As we move towards something else, we keep the option available. And I wish and hope that we can do the same thing with diversity. We try on new things. We reject what doesn't feed our soul, and we take on what does. And constantly encouraging ourselves, well, if that wasn't the right way to do it, there's other ways. And if this isn't the right way to do it, there's other ways. And continuing to do the work. The hardest part is doing the work. The easiest thing is to leave that workbook on the kitchen table, because it reassures you. It's hard for your kids, but it's easier for you. It gets easier again when you move it to the bookshelf, because it's easier for your partner, your child. And it shows that it doesn't have to be front and center. And then it's far easier when it moves to the trunk, to the book bin. And it's far easier when it moves to the box in the garage. And I'll tell you, it's far easier when it ends up at the Goodwill as a donation for someone else that needs that, because you don't need it anymore. But those steps, those phases, they may take years, they may take months, they may take weeks, they may take days, depending on the process and where you are in it. We have got to encourage diversity and diverse thought in the exact same way. Lead people to walking that walk themselves, helping them see that the walk is valuable, helping them see that we all benefit when we see diversity as a plus, not as a chore.
Yeah, and I love that image of moving the book further out, because that's something that I find myself talking about quite a bit in unschooling conversations, is our comfort zones and the work to stretch our comfort zones. Often we talk about it with our children and their interests. And, I've said every single time I have done the work to stretch my comfort zone, I have benefited from it every single time. And, to me, this is just another area of comfort zones that, yes, as you said, it's a lot of work and it can take time, but the richness and the benefits for everyone at the end of it. Well, you know what? There's not an end. There's always, more, but extending your comfort zone, right?
Sure. And the hard part about increasing diversity is there's the expectation that there will be an end.
Erica shared some great insights. Moving the workbook further and further away is a great metaphor for stretching our comfort zones, step by step. And how humans are creatures of convenience. That's part of what keeps us in our comfort zones. And looking at it all through the lens of diversity is eye-opening. Next, Alan Marshall joined me in episode 110, and he talked about stretching his comfort zone around engaging with his kids. Here's what he said when I asked him what piece of advice he'd like to share with other dads who are considering unschooling.
For me, the thing that I've had to try to be conscious of the most, and I think this is related to my gender. As far as I can tell, to the extent I'm self-aware, it seems like this might be gender related, is I have to really think about being involved kind of day to day, moment to moment with my kids. Because this may not be something that all men share, but I think there's, in my example growing up was sort of that the male parent was kind of at maybe a little bit at a distance, kind of didn't do the day-to-day nitty-gritty work of parenting always. And, that's not necessarily because of traditional gender roles only, right? Sometimes it can be more subtle than that. Like I'm often the stay-at-home parent. My wife and I kind of switch off. We both work, but she works more than I do. So, I would be considered the stay-at-home parent if you had to, name one of us as a stay-at-home parent. But even though I'm the one actually at home often, kind of reversing that traditional gender role, still there's this more subtle kind of, male gender role idea of you kids play and I'll go do my adult stuff over here.
Do my thing.
Yeah. And I don't know, for me, I've just found that I really need to be aware of that and to make a conscious decision. I'm going to do this a little differently than was shown to me when I was younger, or maybe what the cultural expectations might still be. Even though I'm not a traditional dad, I need to, in the moment, in that actual time where I'm interacting with my children, I need to decide I'm not going to be the traditional male parent. I'm going to be playful. I'm going to joke around. I'm going to, wrestle. I'm going to do guy stuff with my son, even though that's not my immediate natural inclination. So, that's what occurs to me that might be helpful to talk about with other men, is to maybe be aware of that tendency. Whether you're a traditional sort of breadwinner and you come home in the evening and you see your children, or even if you are a stay-at-home dad, and you're the primary caregiver, still that might be going on. That dynamic might be there. And so I just think that's something that might be worth considering.
And have you found? Yeah, no, that's a great point. The and the tendency to, especially if our kids are occupied and they're doing things, the tendency to pull back and do our own things. But there's just so much we get out of that connection when we do engage with them, isn't there? So you're finding that to be a positive experience, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to, force myself to do it in sort of a negative way. I've got to go play with the kids now so that I can be a good unschooler. That's not an attitude that would be helpful at all, I don't think. More just, when the opportunity arises, really engage, really dig in, kind of, go out of your comfort zone a little. And also, use your partner as an example. My wife she's always been great with kids. So she sort of, is silly with small children to kind of, make interacting with them fun. And I've kind of learned from her, if I can, just be silly, kind of make a joke or kind of make things into a game, I can sort of get things going so that there's some interaction and then you get something out of that. So observing, moms, particularly my wife, and kind of learning, a different way of doing things might be a little different than what I'm used to, but not ever, really avoid having to be sort of in a resentful way where it's sort of a job, like I'm required to do this much interaction with the kids because in order to be, a good modern dad, I must do,
back to ticking off those boxes.
Yeah. I don't think that would be helpful, but
exactly.
But the time you do spend with them, just kind of expand your idea of what that means a little bit.
I loved Alan's perspective on dads stretching their comfort zones around parenting roles with an eye to engaging with their kids more often. It might be helpful to take a moment and see if that's something you might try out, whether you're a dad or a mom. In episode 122 about unschooling passions, I asked Robin Bentley if she had any tips for parents looking to support their child's interests. It's not surprising that stretching our comfort zone was top of mind for her. And in a random connection, I wasn't aware at the time that Robin and Jenny were friends. It was fun to hear a bit about this story from a different perspective.
You got to find a way to support your kids even if you don't like something that, or you can't initially find something to like about what they're doing. My friend Jenny, her daughter Luna was very much into horror stuff, and Jenny was not. Mm-hmm. And it took her a long time. She gave Luna a lot of tools like makeup and taking her places where she could explore that, like, Halloween fun houses kind of thing. And she watched TV shows and movies with her. And she said, I needed kind of to get over some of that to be able to connect with my kid. So sometimes you have to get over your own bad self to really support your kids. Because what they see in it, you have to see what they see in it, not what you see. Mm-hmm. Because you come with your own baggage about stuff, and they don't.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's a being curious piece. For me, it's curious to know what they find interesting. That's what started my, way back when we first began unschooling and Joseph really enjoyed video games. Mm-hmm. The choice was, okay, do I try to control this or be curious about what he loves? And I spent a few months and, oh my gosh, it opened my eyes and there we were. I found ways to support him. I enjoyed his love of that, mm-hmm. but only because I was curious to stretch my own comfort zones, right? And learn more. Same with Mike with karate and, Lissy with the bands, all that kind of stuff, right?
It's pretty freeing to be able to do it. And there's another piece that I think sometimes gets missed is healing your own childhood. Because a lot of us, the baggage that we come with is being told that what we loved wasn't important. What our parents wanted us to do was more important. They couldn't find a way to support or like what we were doing. And so we come into parenthood with those overlays, like you're not good enough, that isn't good enough, blah, blah, blah. So one way to become supportive of your kid is thinking of how you would feel in that situation and what you would have liked your parents to do. So you become the parent that you wish you had by supporting your kids.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. 'Cause so often that really helped me just putting myself in their shoes. I mean, that helps from one perspective, right? It's like if I was me, if I was that child in that position, right? Yeah. How would that feel for me?
Yeah.
And then, because then there's the other side where when I'm trying to help them explore different paths, trying to help them even brainstorm different paths. At that point, I don't want to put me in their shoes. I want to try and see it through their eyes because they would have different goals. Like if I put myself in their shoes, I would have certain goals and certain things I would be wanting to do, right? Like exactly. You said, when she showed up, when you went to that conference and she wanted to do this, this, and this, whereas, you thought she would do this, want to do X, Y, and Z because that's us seeing through our filters, right?
Exactly. I wanted to go to the panels. Well, in fact, sometimes I did. I did.
It makes such a big difference.
It's tricky, those expectations.
I know.
And if you think back to your own childhood, what your expectations or what the expectations your parents had for you and how that turned out, you can sort of take a different path. There's one thing that's been on my fridge for a long time since it was made into a magnet, but it's always been in the back of my head. And that was something that Sandra said. If your child is more important than your vision of your child, life becomes easier. And so instead of laying those expectations on them and what you think they should be or should have been or, will be in the future, if you get rid of that and see them right now for who they are, then it is easier.
It really, really is. And for me, it's that curiosity piece. Be curious as who they really are, right?
I'm glad you keep bringing that curiosity piece up because that's exactly what it is. And I haven't articulated the curiosity part. And so if I ever do a presentation again, that's going in there.
It's like I don't know, it just keeps popping up for me because that is the thing that always helps me move forward in any situation, especially when I need to or I'm looking to stretch my comfort zones and I'm not quite ready yet, right?
Yeah.
Where's my discomfort coming from and why aren't they uncomfortable? And
funny,
that's where the curiosity
How curious
comes in,
is
right?
that?
Why are you not uncomfortable in this? Why do you want to go in that mosh pit with all those people,
ew.
5 years older than you who are going to be banging around? And why do you want to crowd surf and, all the... But oh my gosh, it was has been an amazing experience for her and again, threads into all the things that she does. It's become part of her. And when our children are curious about something, their interest, their passion, and maybe we don't understand why, and maybe they can't articulate why, but if it's something they're drawn to, there is this little thread reaching out, right, that just wants to make a connection, even if nobody knows quite what it is yet. And it's just so fun to help them explore that, isn't it?
It is.
I loved how Robin brought up the idea of healing our own childhood, how stretching our comfort zones and respecting our children's interests can bring up memories of our interests as children being downplayed and maybe even scoffed at. How do you wish your parents had behaved toward the things that you loved? Maybe that's part of our healing process. We can also recognize that we can respect and engage in our interests now. It's never too late. Go for it. And in this next clip from episode 131, Maria Rudolph and I hit on the value of asking our kids or partner, "Can you give me a minute?" when it comes to shifting and stretching our comfort zones. She joined me to talk about deschooling, and the topic came up when I asked her what she found most challenging as she was deschooling.
I would say the most challenging for me and for my daughter, because we've been able to talk about this, since, was definitely my need for control. So I'm a kind of a control freak. I'm not one of those people I can be easygoing, but I need a little bit more structure, which can actually be just a super wonderful quality, like organized and structured. And I don't know. Have you ever seen? Now I'm really digressing. Have you ever seen the show? Now I can't even, Parks and Recreation. It's a U.S. based show.
I have seen some of the episodes. Yes.
I'm Leslie Knope. I'll have a binder color-coded. If you ask me what restaurant you should go to, I'll have a folder for you describing every restaurant in the area. So that, that's kind of how my brain works, which can be a beautiful thing. But when it comes to raising a child who your deepest wish is that they know themselves, that's pretty hard to allow them to know themselves when you're trying to control them. So I think that would have always been an issue for us, but particularly trying to come into unschooling, I was now looking in the mirror a lot and having to realize, oh, that's doing damage. I can't be that person, which thank goodness for unschooling. I probably would have figured that out when she was 30 if we were fortunate. But I think unschooling helped remove those layers faster. But that was my biggest challenge, honestly, was just kind of letting go of the ideal. And I think a lot of people deal with that too, like letting go of this ideal picture of how you're going to raise a child. And you really, unschooling appealed to me on so many levels, but then I had to face myself. And I think that truly was the biggest part of the challenge was me and that need for the ideal and for the control. So I still work on that, personality wise.
That's so interesting. And I can totally relate to that personality style where, if something comes up, like I want to know and organize all around it, right? Yes. I'm known as the planner. Yeah. If you're going on vacation, it's coming up with like, you want to know the route and the different places you might stop along the way and all the different things you might do. And, I have a folder, even now when we go on vacation, I have a folder where we've got the tickets for everything. Yeah. I've got the addresses, the phone numbers, just to, like everything's very organized. But yeah, that's the huge piece is that folder becoming, like our resource, not our director. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's that piece, not insisting that we still follow this. So I can get my organizational needs met, but then once I'm comfortable, that shift to, okay, now we're going to kind of just do what comes up with the flow. And I've got 3 different things we might flow into. And you know what? Still being open to that 4th thing that somebody sees when they cross the street, right?
And that you've nailed that it was exactly it. Like I still struggle with this sometimes, letting go of inflexibility. Mm-hmm. And that it's okay, like you said, to have that binder and to have everything, but to allow for flexibility, it makes me super uncomfortable. And I think maybe just, for me and my personality, maybe that's a safety measure, staying in my comfort zone, and going outside of that, it takes some adjustment. And even now, both David and Davey will, if they come up with an idea or something, they'll just give me some space and some time. And they know, like, within 10 minutes to a day, depending on what it is, eventually I'll come back and go, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense.
My family knows the exact same thing. At least my kids do. They're like, Mom, give me a minute, hey, this thing just came up and I'd love to do this. And I'm like, do you need an answer right away? Because if you need it right away, it might be no, but can I think about it for 10 minutes?
Yes, and that's such
and give it to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say just that little phrase, like, can you give me a minute? Mm-hmm. Was such an epiphany for me that I didn't have to come up with the answer right away, or we didn't have to discuss it all right away, that I could just step back a little bit and say, and that my family would accept it if I said, I need a minute to just kind of process that a little bit. Like, I'm not sure I like that. I'm not sure I'm comfortable. Give me a minute. And then to kind of sit with it a little bit and know that, they'd be okay and we could discuss it. I don't know. I think my personality is too, like, sometimes I get kind of all or nothing. And so it was like, I have to come up with the answer now, and I have to be totally comfortable with it on every level, and everybody's got to be happy. So I look back at different points in unschooling with Davey where I can see, like, oh yeah, that was like a real turning point where I kept my mouth shut more often after that, or, I could see that I was taking away some joy, or that she's a very easygoing personality. So it would be easy for me to unknowingly walk over that to a degree. And there were moments where I could see what I was doing, and it was like, oh, I can't do that. That's really made me feel icky. Mm-hmm. And I could see it reflected in her face. And so that's when I see these different turning points where I was like, oh, I can't do that anymore. This is what it's doing. So I think had Davy too been a different personality where she was like, no way, Mom, that might have done a number of things, but it's just interesting always to see the dynamic. Interesting to talk about. It's interesting to compare notes with one another and kind of say, oh, okay, that's what was happening there. Oh, get it. All right. So
yeah, those conversations are so helpful, aren't they? I mean, when you have that openness and that trust level where people can say what they see, and it's when you get to that level where you're not taking things personally, but you know, you're not taking them on as an attack, but as information, as just better understanding each other, right?
Absolutely. I love that it's shared information. We talk a lot about that with in Unschooling, about how we share information with our kids to give them the information so that they can make decisions based on information they might not have had or they might not have known, and so that they can have that available to use it in a certain way. And of course that works with us too. So when I'm given information and just like at those pinnacle points where I could see what she was thinking or you know, a look on her face, and I thought, oh, this is not a good direction I'm going in. Mm-hmm. That wasn't great. Now, as she, what? Or, hey, this doesn't feel good, FYI. And it's just kind of been a beautiful thing to see all that happen.
It's when you're paying attention in a conversation, right? When you stop trying to direct it and you try to say over and over what you want, then you're like plowing ahead and you're not noticing all those clues, those looks that pass by their face, the shuffle, the twist of the body, all those little pieces of information that they don't necessarily need to be verbal, do they?
That's really, really good point. And just how you said that stopping when you quit being the director and you stop to notice and really be present. And as a planner organizer, I'm always thinking ahead. And I feel like Unschooling kind of helped me stand back and observe a little bit more, and to observe and think about my part in that. Instead of observing and directing, I'm thinking about, well, where does that put me in connection with this person, and what can I do differently to ease their path or to get out of their path very often.
Yeah, I loved your point about, being more quiet and listening more, because so often, I remember times when they would be, having this idea and this idea and this idea, and my planning brain would be like, okay, trying to make that shift and trying to think of the implications of that choice and that choice. And then, I'd be tempted to jump in with pros, cons, comments, etc. But when I could be quiet and just watch the pros, because they weren't done. They were verbally processing what they were thinking. And when I just watched them and sat back and let them, go through the work that they were doing, they got somewhere completely different. And then I could see how they got there. Now you better understand why they got there, right? Because you could see all the different pieces that came together. And then you better understood even why you were doing X in the end, right? Yes. And then we got to that place, like you said, without us putting our hands all over it. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
I do. And it makes a lot of sense. And I was thinking about how you were saying how when they would come up with ideas, thinking about something and you were already saying, well, this is what you could do. Or I struggle with that a little bit. And my husband just pointed something out to me the other day that, somebody might come up with an idea, whether it's him or it's Davey or even a friend, might say, oh, let's do X, Y, Z. And my immediate out of my mouth is generally, oh, well, we could go that way because there's actually a detour there. So, and then, it's going to be late, so we can't really go. Maybe we'd want to go the other way. I'm thinking of all the can'ts instead of just stepping back and sharing the joy. I think I'm doing everybody a favor, of course, because, I'm organizing it, letting them know what's in their way.
It's so much more smooth this way.
But that it's taking away their joy. And he said to me, you're kind of stepping into, they just want to talk about what they love. They're not ready to organize it yet. And you've already organized it for them. And it takes their joy and takes kind of what's the word I'm looking for? The steam right out of them. And I was and I knew I've already kind of had, that's my personality a little bit, and I struggle. But in the instance he was giving me, I didn't see it. So when he said that, I was so appreciative, because it was like, oh, right. Okay, right. I do that. I've got to think more, speak less, and let people, let it go. So I think, like I had said earlier, unschooling helped me do that in a way I'm not sure I would have sooner.
It's so helpful to keep coming back to the present moment and opening up my focus to my surroundings. Actually, it's kind of hard to do one without the other, isn't it? I really enjoyed that tangent with Maria. And next up is a clip from episode 135. One of the 10 questions I asked Anna Brown about her unschooling journey was directly about stretching her comfort zones. Here's what she shared. So we talked about comfort zones a little bit earlier. I was just wondering if there was ever an interest or activity that one of your kids wanted to pursue that stretched a comfort zone, and how you moved through that.
Yeah. So with my oldest, again, we have a lot in common. We look a lot alike, and we process information a lot the same, but there are definitely areas where we're really different. And there was a time kind of in her, I guess, early teens maybe, where she went through a stage of really a lot of horror, death, darkness, really heavy stuff. And, I could see she was working through some things, but I also just saw she was enjoying it. But for me personally, I did not like the energy of it. I am sensitive, and I take that kind of stuff in, and it hurts my heart to see people hurting or hurting other people. That is really hard for me. And I had to really work hard to be present with her exploration of that and not take it on as my own, and to not tell stories about it, like how it was for her too. So I had to keep my focus on our connection, like where we connected and how I could facilitate her, even if I wasn't participating. And I think that's probably one of the keys, is realizing we all have different interests and we're exploring things for different reasons. None is more or less valid. But we can always be there to support and facilitate someone, whether we understand what they're doing or why they're doing it. Interestingly, with this particular thing, years later, when we talked about that time in her life, I learned how critical it was for her as she was moving through some very big fears that she had. And these were fears she was not verbalizing to me at the time. These were things she was taking in and trying to make sense of. And had I tried to kind of curtail the entrance because I felt like, oh, that's negative, or you don't want to have all this energy or whatever, because that's how it affected me, I think I would have really impacted her ability to move through something that was very important and kind of pivotal in her development, so that she could become comfortable with these things. Like, that was her process of understanding some kind of horrific deaths that she was exposed to and some other things that happened. And so, we each are going to do that differently. And so I'm grateful that I was, even though it was hard for me, able to kind of step back and, let her do that and still support, because she, as we talked about it later, never felt judgment from me about it. Like, she knew it was something that I didn't enjoy. And so she would kind of say, oh, Mom, you're not going to like this one, or you're not going to, like this. but she knew that I still was totally fine, supporting her. And so I was grateful that she had gotten that message, because I wasn't sure that had come through all the time, because it was so hard for me. We can't always see what's going on inside their heads. And actually, no, I'm going to say we never can see what's going on inside their heads. So I think stop trying to write someone else's story, and like why they're doing something or what they're getting out of it or what they should be doing differently. I think kind of stop that piece, and learn to trust in their journeys and to keep that connection. And again, that's just what has seen us through so many difficult pieces, whether I'm stretching or they're stretching or whatever. I think it's just that connection as we keep talking about.
Yeah, I was, as you were telling that story, what popped in my mind was trust. And then you threw that in there at the end too, because that's why I think it's so important to really dig into deschooling at the beginning when you're getting there, and really understand what's going on and understand why that connection and trust is so important to develop.
Yeah.
Because you're going to need those tools later, right? To be able to trust when you don't understand why somebody's making these choices or doing these things or has this interest, or whatever, or why they're asking to try this or do this, if it's not something that that you guys are talking about, you still need to trust that if this is something that they want to pursue or need to, whatever, like their choices, trust their choices, right? Because you're there, you're in connection. What they want to talk to you about at the time, if anything, they will. But like you said, to be able to, as much as you can, just not exude that judgment. You said later, she said she didn't feel that judgment from you, and she felt that trust. It's okay that they know that this isn't your favorite thing in the world, because they know you.
I can be honest about who I am, but I don't have to put that on her. So you need to be like this, because she doesn't. And she didn't, she needed to go through that time. Now that we look back, how important it was for her. But I think you can be honest. And I think that maybe is another place people trip up. Well, I don't want to pretend to like that or whatever. I'm like, I know you don't have to do that. Yeah. But it's just watch that judgment, make sure that you're okay, with your boundaries, but that you're not putting that on them, that's bad for you, or that, that's going to affect you the same way. I think we do that a lot too. So like those moments are really hard for me in films or whatever. But it doesn't affect other people the same way. Like I've just learned this. So like I have to think about clowns, don't like clowns at all, but everybody loved the new, Stephen King. It. Okay. So they're like, they all loved it. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to watch it. It's clowns. I'm being silly. I can watch clowns. Oh my gosh. I didn't give a flying flip about the clown. The clown could come sit in the room with me. What I didn't like was that bullying, how hateful the children and the adults were to each other. I walked out. I was like, I'm not watching this. I don't care about the clown. This is what I can't do, And so they know that about me. Like that is who I'm not going to change that piece of them, but they loved it. And so then they could tell me about the movie and what they loved about it later, because I just couldn't watch it. And then I could be excited for them and, oh yeah, that was interesting or whatever. But yeah, I think be honest about yourself, but realize other people aren't taking it in the same way that you are necessarily. And that's kind of an important distinction.
I love the message that flowed through Anna's story. Stop trying to write our child's story, trust in their journey, and continue to connect with them. Our last snippet comes from my conversation with Alex Peace in episode 162. I love how she took my question, was there a time when one of your kids' interests really stretched your comfort zone? And she changed it up a bit.
Well, I don't know. This is what came up for me. It's not exactly an interest, but a couple of my kids read very late. And so it was something that really stretched me as an unschooling parent. For a while, I sort of did a lot of reading about, reading difficulties, particularly online, hearing other parents' anecdotes. And then at some point, there were two things happened. One was that I was flipping through a book about dyslexia or something, and it was an academic book. It was, studies of various things, and I sort of went straight to the, what's the biggest problem? And it said, the biggest problem is how people feel about their reading issues. It can become an emotional problem. And I was like, right, so, okay. We don't have to go there. That's easy. That's under control. And the second thing that happened is at one point I said to one of my kids something like, it doesn't look like you're learning to read like I learned how to read, but I'm sure there's lots of other people that are learning to read how you do. Do you want me to ask, some of the folk online and get you some hints? And she said, no, it'll be fine. I'll figure it out when I need to. And I went, right. Okay, then. So I then pretty purposefully did not look any further into reading difficulties. I worked really hard at creating an atmosphere of, well, this is the way it is, and you need me to read to you, so that's the way it is. We're going to read to you. We're going to read for you. And maintaining that this is just
your way.
Normal.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of cute. Like if we were out with a big group of homeschooling kids and everybody just read out loud. Like any of the things, it just wasn't a big deal in our group. But I did have to kind of really, there was some issue with some family members. Mm-hmm. And so I just really set up some boundaries, like, okay. And I what I felt like was I kept the world at bay until they learned to read on their own. And so that was, I think, that was one of the things that I felt good about.
Buffer, you kept that.
Yeah,
buffer's probably the best word for it, right? You kept them in situations where it wasn't a big deal, and where it would have been a big deal. Like back to that research where the emotional piece is like the hardest piece. Feeling bad about yourself. Yeah. So that's what you took that and focused on that and didn't go into those situations, right?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And the byproduct of it was that I got to read to my kids for years. Yeah. Which is fabulous. So we read a lot of books out loud. So that was fun.
I love the work Alex did to stretch her comfort zones and get to a place that made sense to her. And then that's where she set her boundaries. And then recognized the fabulous upside to it all. It was wonderful stuff. I hope you found this compilation interesting with lots of food for thought when it comes to moving through opportunities to stretch your comfort zones. It's such a great way to both support our kids and get to know ourselves even better. Be curious and have a wonderful week.